So well, as I said, this is a workshop. The title of the workshop is Mindfulness and the Neuroscience of Spirituality. So we could ask, what neuroscience and Buddhist mindfulness practice have to do with our 12-step way of life? Well, in fact, that's what we are addressing in this discussion today between Frank Liddy and Dr. Lisa Miller. Frank Liddy has over 35 years practice-based experience with mindfulness programs that have helped to transform the lives of many people across Ireland. Frank has made great use of his journey in recovery and is the co-founder of the Black Mountain Zen Center in Belfast and another project called Compassionate City Belfast. And Dr. Lisa Miller is a professor of psychology and education at Columbia University Teachers College and is the founder of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute, the first Ivy League graduate program in spirituality and psychology. Lisa's new book, The Awakened Brain, The New Science of Spirituality and Our Quest for an Inspired Life, has been described as a groundbreaking exploration of the neuroscience of spirituality and a bold new paradigm for health, healing, and resilience. Been described by Dr. Deepak Chopra as a new revolution of health and well-being and a testament to and celebration of the power within. So I would really like to thank you both for being with us today for this wonderful discussion. And this is not for the first time. You've both been with us before, so we're very grateful that you've come back. And I'll now turn things over to Frank, who will be leading this discussion in an interview-style format with Lisa for around 45 minutes, followed by general Q&A. Thank you, Frank. Over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for the introduction and the welcome. And thank you, everybody. And a big thank you to Lisa. So what I'd like to do would be if we could start with just maybe a short mindfulness practice to bring us into this moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite my bell to sound 3 times. We'll do a short practice, a short body scan, and then I will end with inviting the bell to sound twice. So bear with me. Begin by noticing where your attention is right now. Is there a story, anticipation, planning, remembering, gently with kindness? Give yourself permission to arrive, to be present, letting go of doing and dropping into being. Now, gently, with kindness, bring your attention to your body. Notice contact with the floor. Notice contact with your seat. Notice how your seat supports your body. Back upright. Not too tight. Not too loose. Lower your shoulders. Head upright. As though you're balancing a book on the crown of your head. Now gently bring your attention to your breath and allow your breath to take center stage. Notice how you breathe. No right way, no wrong way, no effort, no adjustment. Your breath is always present. Not a future breath, nor a past breath. Be present to this breath. And as you breathe in, see if you can follow the in-breath as you breathe in, exhaling, letting go of the out-breath as you breathe out. Like a wave rolling onto the shore and gently returning to the ocean. Notice the ebb and flow of your breath. Your attention wanders. Notice and gently return to your breath. Breathing in, being present to the in-breath as you breathe in. Exhaling, letting go of the out-breath as you breathe out. The birds they sang at the break of day. Start again, I heard them say. Don't hold on to yesterday or what is yet to be. Ring the bell that rings. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. A good stretch, a good yawn. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are on the planet. And a big welcome to Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, hello.
Good to hear you and great to see you.
Wonderful.
So, Lisa, I must admit, I had the good fortune of talking to you about a week ago. Yep. And I was amazed, impressed, to say the least, whenever we were able to connect with spirituality. So for those on Zoom tonight, I was wondering maybe if you could give maybe a lightning tour about, where you came from and what happened and how you've entered into this beautiful field of spirituality.
Well, thank you, Frank. And again, I'm so grateful to be back together with this community. I, to answer your question, was born like every child, a very spiritual child. And I remember as a young child being able to feel this great joy, the delight, the sort of sacred ecstasy in life, just feel it and see it with my mind's eye. I talked to trees and animals, and I felt that the world was very much alive. So I couldn't wait to go to school. Someday I thought, when I'm big and I'm important, when I'm in kindergarten, we're going to talk about all this, because it seemed so wonderful. And so I went to kindergarten, and we thought we were going to talk about the symphony of life, this sort of sacred feeling. And it really wasn't what we much talked about. We talked about writing and we talked about math, and those were helpful skills. But really, my core spiritual life was preserved because my mother was a devoutly spiritual, and in her case, also religious person. But there are two things. And in her case, they went together. And she would pray out loud and watch the sunset and cry with joy, thank you, God, for the children. So she really helped solidify what we're all given, which is an innate spiritual core, a capacity for experiencing, see, feel, and know, and resonate in our heart and our body and our mind, the transcendent presence that is loving and holding and guiding. She helped my natural capacity that we all have to be sort of locked in. And then as I got older, I found that no one much talked about this spiritual dimension. And when my family, and because it's not just my story, it's theirs too. So I'll simply say, when my family faced a time of significant trauma when I was a teenager, I, saw my family see some of the best therapists, and nobody really helped this person who I loved so much in my family. And, we went to the very best doctor in Boston and the very best doctor here. And it really wasn't until one day my family's Jewish, and I went to the rabbi and I said, Rabbi, can you help our family? And he said, please sit down. Please sit down. And I told him everything that had happened. And he said, of course, I'm so grateful that you have come. Well, the next day I came home and my family was a joy. And the person suffering the most had the phone held high and said, the rabbi called, the rabbi called. And it was really at that moment that I realized that it was going to be the spiritual connection between us, like we share here now, and in our path as a family with God, the higher power, that was going to pull our family out of this snake pit of despair. And that is what happened. It happened for us as a family, and it happened in my own path individually, seeing that was the way forward. So I was very stunned to go off to graduate school in clinical psychology, and no one spoke a word about the higher power. And no one spoke a word. Not all social support, we're all aware, is the same. Well, no one spoke about spiritual social support, where unconditional love, that where we see each other as souls on earth. And so relational spirituality was absent, and that made no sense, particularly when I worked with patients on an inpatient unit. So now fast forward, I'm an intern on an inpatient unit. I'm a new doctor, and the patients got the picture that we don't talk about that here. And yet in the nadir of suffering, horrible moments of suffering, they didn't feel free until there was just simply a glimpse of opportunity. And they'd say, Dr. Miller, come here, and come here meant we would walk down the hall. We walked into the kitchen, come here. We walked into the pantry. We walked into the corner near the pots and pans. And way in the corner by the pots and pans, the patient would say, tomorrow I'm being sent upstate. Upstate is where, you basically have no rights. You're physically alive, but your life has been put upstate. Tomorrow I'm going upstate. I don't know that I'll ever be back. Dr. Miller, will you pray with me? And so standing by these huge, unit-wide pots and pans, there's only one answer, right? And that was, of course. she happened to be Catholic, and she took out her rosary and she started praying the rosary with so much feeling and connection to who I call God, who she called God, and one another. And there by the pots and pans, we had a deeply spiritual ceremony. And then she turned to me and she said, "Okay, Dr. Miller, now you pray the way you pray." And so I prayed the way my mother had taught me. And we went back and forth, back and forth. And at the end, she said, "Now let's pray for each other." And she said, "God, please help Dr. Miller," the day before she was going upstate. And I, of course, prayed for her. The next day I came back, her bed was made and she was gone. Mm. And she was right. She never came back. So, we know when we're being called on for one another that you are, we are each other's trail angels. Mm. And that we're put for a purpose. In my view, a dual coming back from any struggle, minus the transcendent relationship, the higher power, and who we really are to one another, relational spirituality. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so my life's work became about creating the clinical and scientific case for that to try to change the field. And other labs have joined us.
Thank you for that. And I hope that lady's well today, who went upstate. What interests me, Lisa, when it comes to spirituality, is that how does one know that they're being spiritual and that they're not deluding themselves?
So I think that we are, through the lens of science, we have evidence that we are born to be in relationship to the transcendent. We are all hardwired with the same neural docking station, if you will. And it will probably not surprise you to hear what the components of that neural docking station are. I'll tell you three. The first is that we are hardwired to perceive, not just to believe as a thought or a theology, but to feel and know that we are truly loved and held. Just as we are loved and held as children in our parents' or grandparents' arms, there's a bonding network that comes up online as we feel our connection to the higher power. We are held. We will not fall through to infinity. There's a buoyancy. The second circuit is that we can move, our attention shifts from a very narrow bowling alley, I've got to have it, I've got to get it, the dorsal attention, to the bottom up ventral attention. And we release I've got to have it, which can be a craving or an addiction or an attachment. I've got to have it, to a broad bottom up ventral attention. The whole world suddenly was re-illuminated. And many people say a whole new bright yellow door opens and pops. Our attention is shifted. Loved and held, guided. And then finally, the parietal puts in hard boundaries so that we know we each have a different zipped up bio bodysuit, and we may have different GPS coordinates. Like we are a point, but we're also a wave. We're whitecaps on one ocean. We are part of the family of humanity, of life. Loved and held, guided, and we are never alone. So this understanding of the higher power, of the transcendent relationship, holds the same neurocircuitry, whether I am Catholic, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, spiritual, but not religious. If I say the forest is my cathedral, I still use this very same neurodocking station for the transcendent relationship. And what I find so beautiful to share in 12-step community is that that is the same neurodocking station through which we show up in unconditional love of neighbor for one another and in service. So relational spirituality holds the same deep hub of opening our world. And when we're good to one another, we start to feel the presence of God or the higher power. And when we love one another, that is a divine, transcendent love.
And Lisa, I can honestly say, and for other listeners as well, when I met you for the first time over a week ago, I got that deep connection with you. That connection as though we've known each other for a lifetime. There's no doubt about that. But for the other viewers and other listeners, for people who may have some doubt when it comes to spirituality, what I would like to know is, how could you advise someone who has doubt, to tap into that spiritual docking station?
Yes. So this is our birthright. It is a quarter inch under the surface. It's for all of us. But there are ways of being where, could I do a practice that we may have done last time? But not everyone was there. Could I do it again?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Before I ever share a practice, I honor the teacher who shared that specific practice with me. So I share this with you. I think, again, to share it with the late Dr. Gary Weaver was my teacher. May we? Okay. I'm going to invite you all to close your eyes and clear out your inner space with 5 breaths. I invite you to set before you a table. This is your table. And to your table, you may invite anyone, living or deceased, who truly has your best interest in mind. Anybody living or deceased who truly has your best interest in mind. And with them all sitting there, ask them if they love you. And now you may invite your higher self, the part of you that's so much more than anything you've done or not done, anything you have or not have, your true eternal higher self. And ask you if you love you. And now finally, you invite your words or yours, your higher power, and ask them if they love you. And now, with all of those people sitting there right now, what do they need to let you know? What do they need to share? What do they need to tell you now? And when you're ready, I invite you back.
That was beautiful, Lisa. That was beautiful, and I believe that anybody who has any doubts, just to check that out, as a way of connecting with our spirit, Also, another question since I spoke to you last, what came to my mind as well was, how can we, right, as spiritual beings, how can we reach out to those? The last time I spoke to you, I was telling you about in Belfast, Ireland, here at the moment, there's a lot of homeless people. The weather at the moment is below freezing, and there's a lot of people who are sleeping out in this cold weather. How can we reach out to that homeless person, right, who is frozen, and introduce, in a spiritual act, the love that we just spoke about there now?
That's beautiful. I think every single person here lives in that love, in that capacity, in coming together. And is expert equally. My own view is simply to say, I see you, brother, I see you, sister, that we see each other into existence as spiritual beings. And the greatest violation I think I have seen is to not bear witness to someone's being.
I understand that we can walk, and become sort of blindfolded, and to look away from that suffering. Yeah, and there's something that we also discussed when we met before. It was something that I brought up, and it's something that's brought up quite a lot within, the school of Zen, Soto school that I belong to, and that is, how do we suffer? Yeah. And maybe could I reach that question into your good self?
Yes, yes. How do I suffer personally? I would say that I deeply hold the view that suffering is the doorway to a deepening and awakening of spiritual life. It's been my journey. And as a scientist, I've seen this, whether I look through MRI studies or long-term health and wellness studies or any form of lens. Suffering really is the gateway to an awakening of our spiritual heart and a deepening of our soul and an awakening of our spiritual brain. It is how we are built. And in fact, when we look at people's who are have a strong spiritual core, very strong, they say my personal spiritual life with or without a specific faith tradition is very important to me. It is highly central to how I walk through my day. Those people were 2.5 times more likely to have developed a strong spiritual core over the past 10 years through suffering. It really is true that things like dark night of the soul or our being lost on the path is we are built to then awaken as we shift from not having what we want, being disappointed, not being able to control, right? What I might call an achieving lens, to what is life showing me now? What is God asking of me now? What is being revealed to me now? Whether it's through synchronicity or dreams or mystical experiences or deep inner wisdom, our many faculties of knowing start to open up and we see life gains pixels and dimensions. It's spiritual awakening until the next round. So we are hardwired for this.
And also, this is for myself as well, with the awakened brain, yep. Tell me, please, what would the awakened brain, what is it like to have an awakened brain?
We are all given the equipment, and it's very often through struggle and suffering that we start to use our awakened brain. And the awakened brain really is our capacity for transcendent perception, where we see life not simply as something that is linear and determines our fate, but rather life is infinite. We are able to perceive its deeper, truer nature. Life is loving. We're not going to be alone. Life is guiding. These deep qualities of what I would call the sacred consciousness field, the way life is really built, maybe spirit or the force of. So when we use our awakened brain, we can actually navigate life and be surprised. We won't get necessarily what we want, but what we want quickly looks stale and empty. We get something new because an awakened understanding, when we use our awakened brain, that high pixel catch in the catcher's mitt, that receptive form of transcendent awareness, has information that has yet to fully unfold before us. So rumination, control, my mighty mouse feeling, air traffic control, achieving awareness is only based from today backwards. It's all historically based. My appetites, my goals, they're all based from today back. But an inspired catch in the catcher's mitt, that gut instinct, that intuition, that dream that means something, that synchronicity that's parting the way, that has information that has yet to be fully unfurled. It has information that will be clear in the future.
Inspiring, Lisa, inspiring. And tell me, Lisa, how do you and how can I and how can we, nourish and nurture our spiritual being.
This is our birthright. And so any of the ways that even as a child, you can recall getting back into your deep felt, that wonderful numinous felt connection with who I call God, the force of life, life itself, dusting off a rusty prayer that maybe your grandma taught you, a practice that maybe a parent shared when you were a child. If you can go back, those oftentimes are there for you because the highway has been paved. Basically, the brain has been myelinated, so you can get back there. That's one way. But another way is something that is so strong in 12-step, which is relational spirituality. When we are towards one another, loving, holding, guiding, and never leave anyone alone. When we are purely, unconditionally loving, as is the spine of 12-step, that is reawakening our brain. That is an engagement of our awakened brain. And it primes us to that much more be able to see the woman or man at the grocery store or the child at our door through that same deep lens of being loving, holding, guiding, and never leaving them alone. So relational spirituality works both ways.
And then, tell me, please, in the spiritual world, in the spiritual dimension, does fear exist?
Well, I think if we're deeply connected, or when we are deeply connected, we can still have moments of fear. I mean, it's not that we give up all fear, but there's a sense that the deepest source of life is buoyant. And maybe here I might invite people to think of times when, just the bottom fell out and everything felt horrible. I mean, and it just felt terrible. And just then someone comes along. It's a loving, holding, guiding presence. It could be an old friend calls. It could be that someone shows up and says, listen, I don't know you, but I've got to tell you this. The synchronicities, which really are expressions of the universe or God, our higher power, helping us along, coming in not just transcendence, but immanence, helping us along the path. These synchronicities are a blessing. And we show up for one another often in synchronicity. You are a blessing to someone on the road. So I sort of think of us as all divine characters with divine appointments on a stage. And every single person is the central character showing up for one another. There's nothing that is inert or dead in the universe.
And would that stage, would that be a divine drama or a divine comedy?
Magnificently both. I love that question.
Yeah. And tell me, this is a question I asked everybody, and that is, where does fear come from?
In my experience, fear is when I am attached to my mortal body.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Fear is when I am attached to a material outcome. But when I release control and I release the material outcome, I find that the walk with spirit, guidance by synchronicity, dreams, intuitions, that type of awakened of guidance takes me places that are not what I had wanted. They are often places I'd never even been. They don't always feel good. Sometimes it hurts, but where I'm going and how I'm getting there in this dialogue, this loving, guiding dialogue with life or my higher power, is a much more inspired leg of the journey because I allowed it to be guided. I still think we have to prepare. We have to pack our knapsack and we need enough food and water for the trail. But it really is on the trail angels who show us the way. And that's all of us for one another. I think we are sent from central casting. I will say that.
There's a great singer by the name of Sting who was with a band called The Police.
Yes.
He sang a song, that we're spirits in a material world. Yeah. Would you agree with his words?
I would say that we are spirits. There is loving, sacred consciousness in us, through us, among us, that we are spirits. And sometimes we are manifest materially, but we also exist independent of matter. I can share with you that in the Awakened Brain, I described the story, but I didn't put this piece in. So I'm sharing it very specifically with you. When each of my children were conceived, there was at that moment this whoosh, sense of crossing, a very powerful, bright light crossing into material form. So I think that we exist independent of matter, and we exist in and through matter, and that immanence is sacred too. You know, how we treat each other matters.
And was that your experience whenever your children were being born?
So in the Awakened Brain, I share that I had a very, very difficult time becoming a parent. My husband and I, when I was about 30, he was 31, decided, let's start a family. You know, I had the job I'd wanted, he had the job he wanted, and now it was time to make a family, which I now look back and realize was radical illusion of control. It was achieving awareness. It was everything that I have come to see creates attachment and misery. But that was it. It was time to start our family. So we took off and we went down to the Caribbean, and we came back and there was no baby. And so I said, well, who gets one for one? And we took off and we went to the desert, and we came back. There still was no baby. And after about 6 months, I got this creepy, horrible feeling. What if we can't conceive? It was sort of like this dread creeping up on me. And I thought, no, that couldn't be. We're both so healthy. We're both so young. And after a year, it was obvious. So we sought some help. And I went into what became 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, a very long road of fertility treatments. And every step of the way, researched awareness. I was a good, I could add up A and B. This is the best team. This team I found that went invented in vitro. And through this process, nonetheless, had a place. So this process continued with a lot of misery. Every failed procedure felt like a funeral. It was just awful. My husband was gutted on the floor. This presence, one night I was asleep, and whoosh, space and time opened, and I sat up. It was 3 a.m. and a very strong, very sacred presence came and said, if you were pregnant, would you adopt? And this presence was very sacred and very profound. And I said, no. And very gently, time and space folded back in. It was very numinous. It was bright. It was another dimension, folded in, and it was quiet. Well, we continued on our journey, and I started noticing helpers and healers, trail angels. For instance, after another failed in vitro, I was completely depressed. I was, really seeking to be alone, like a hermit onto myself, sitting in the back of a big city bus going up Broadway. And who should step on but a quite unusual gentleman who walked by about 2, 4, 8, 10 empty seats and plopped down by my side. And I really didn't have much to offer. And he turns to me and I think, oh no. And he says, lady, you look like just that type of person who would go all around the world adopting beautiful children.
Wow.
And so I continued on this very sacred journey. Day in and day out, trail angels came. It was I could feel it, loved and held and guided, never alone. Well, the presence came back. Time and space opened. The question was asked. I said, I'm closer, but not yet. Well, my husband and I then, after one of the most extensive trips across the country for one of the top doctors, were sitting side by side on bed rest in a very nice hotel we'd splurged to hope that this in vitro should take. He was depressed. I was depressed, but there was a little flicker of hope. And we turned on the TV to just sit there on bed rest in solidarity. And an interminable 4-hour documentary came on the TV. We couldn't turn it off. I said, how could this be? We're in a nice hotel. It was stuck. And who should be on the screen but a young boy, 8 years old, living in a garbage dump. They panned and showed heaps and heaps of trash. And through the translator, the little boy says, I don't care that I live in a garbage dump. I don't care that I can't go to school. But it hurts so much to not be loved that I sniff glue to make the pain go away.
Wow.
My husband and I looked at each other and we're like, we have created our own misery. Radical attachment, radical control. This little boy, all he needed was love and commitment. He needed this heart of parenting, love and commitment. So my husband, who's a civilian in all this stuff, looked at me first and he said, you know what? There's a child out there for us. So we found our way there with some trail angels, one of whom was my mother. Honey, just called to let you know our neighbor invited and just adopted the most beautiful little boy, and his name is Alan Paul. I just thought you should know. He's from Russia. We met with the clergyman's daughter who finds babies in Russia. Her walls were covered with beautiful families that had come together through adoption. Little babies, young children, some almost teenagers, beautiful families. And she looked at me very practically and then looked at my husband and then leaned in towards me. And she said, you're the mom. You need to tell me, what do you want in a child? And I said, I don't care if this is a boy or a girl. I don't care what race this child is. Please, a child who can love. And my husband leaned in and said, yeah, all that, but kind of a girl.
Wow.
And I leaned in over him and I said, but really a child who can love. So from there, we knew that maybe there was a child out there for us. 5 depressing, agonizing years of not getting what we want, caused by our own suffering. When the phone rang, Jane had called, and in a way that only an older cousin has license to speak. Hey, little Jane, you think you're so smart at Columbia. Well, we study spirituality. Why don't you come out here and see a real healing ceremony? The Lakota are having a healing ceremony. So I by that point knew to acknowledge and embrace synchronicity. I canceled my appointments for the week. I flew to the center country, South Dakota, and there at a healing ceremony was welcomed with about 200 people, maybe 300, by the chief. And the chief said, we're here in healing ceremony. He opened, and the first thing he said is, my son who is adopted. And he started to cry. And he went on to speak of his son. And we then heard each person's healing story, very similar to 12-step, and then broke into the men's and women's Inipi, the sweat lodge. Well, in the women's sweat lodge, the medicine man's wife opened up and said, let's ask each person, why have you come to the Inipi? For what do you pray? And for the first time, I felt like I was in the right place. The first woman says, I've come here because my son is 40 and he no longer comes home. I'm worried for his family. And the next woman said, I'm here because my son is 14. He started using drugs and I'm worried he'll become addicted. And the next woman said, my son. And we went around praying for sons until we got to Big Jane. And Big Jane said, I'm here with my cousin, Little Jane. She has come looking for her child. And I'm wondering if we could help her. And all of the women looked with such understanding, like, yes. And I knew that I was on the path. We prayed prayed. When we prayed for each other right here now, which is the us, the superordinate. And whoosh, I could see it in my mind's eye go up. And that night, Frank, after now 5 years, that night, after 5 years, we got a call from the other side of the world. And the call said, "We have found the Miller's child." This is on my phone machine back home that night, very night. "There are many wonderful girls, and we can find you a girl if that's really what Mr. Miller wants. But this is the Miller's son. This is a boy. This is a son."
Wow.
So his name is Isaiah Lakota for the people who helped us find him.
Wow.
And that was the most extraordinary way of finding Isaiah. I went home, the tape came, I fell in love the second I saw him, the euphoric love, the buoyant love. And I had in that moment become a parent when I saw his video, his little arm around the nurse in Russia, da, da, da. Well, we went to bed that night. The presents came. I could feel it coming. There's a rhythm. It arrives. Well, it's not an it, the great presence arrives. I sit up. The questions asked: if you were pregnant, would you adopt? Absolutely. I have found my spiritual son. Absolutely. And that night we conceived naturally his spiritual twin, a girl, kind of a girl. So is that a story about getting pregnant? No, that is a story about releasing the illusions of control and walking the spiritual path that's there for all of us. And losing the ego along the way in big chunks, ripping it out.